1 second later, peace was broken. The small town of Havenbrook had always been a place of calm. Nestled between rolling hills and a river that glittered like silver in the sun, it was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children played until dusk without fear. For decades, peace was more than a feeling. It was the heartbeat of the town. But peace, as the world often proves, can shatter in a single second. It began on a quiet Sunday evening, when the streets lay empty except for the occasional bark of a dog and the golden glow of lamps flickering in living room windows. Families gathered around their dinner tables, laughter weaving through the night air. No one could imagine that beyond the tree line, shadows had already begun to stir, and Havenbrook's innocence was living its final minutes. In the Dawson household, 12-year-old Ellie sat by the window, sketching in her notebook. She loved drawing the world as she saw it. Trees bending in the wind, her father's smile, her mother's hands weaving yarn. She hummed softly, unaware that in the distance, an unfamiliar sound had broken through the stillness. The low hum of engines, too many to belong to a neighbor. Her father, Mark Dawson, set his fork down, his brow furrowed. He had served in the military years ago and knew the language of sound. The engines didn't belong here. His wife, Clara, noticed the shift in his face. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood, moved to the window, and pulled the curtain back just enough to peer outside. His heartbeat quickened, not because of what he saw, but because of what he didn't. The streets were too quiet. The birds, usually chattering before nightfall, were silent. Then, faintly, from the woods, came the crack of a branch, followed by another. Mark stepped back, his instincts telling him something had crossed the invisible line between safety and threat. Clara felt the chill in the air shift. Though no wind blew, Ellie kept sketching, lost in her own world, as if peace still lived in her pencil strokes. On the other side of town, Sheriff Daniels sipped coffee at his desk. He was a man who had grown comfortable in the uneventful rhythm of Havenbrook. Calls were usually about lost pets or kids sneaking into the quarry. But when his radio crackled with a static-laced voice reporting strange activity by the river, his stomach turned. He grabbed his hat, muttering, "Probably nothing," though something inside whispered otherwise. The engines grew louder now, rolling through the dark like thunder. Several residents peered out of windows, confusion clouding their faces. A caravan of black vehicles emerged from the tree line, headlights piercing the night. No markings, no license plates visible. They moved with eerie synchronization, like a swarm that had rehearsed its arrival. Havenbrook, a town untouched by chaos for generations, was about to learn what invasion felt like. Ellie finally looked up from her notebook when the rumble shook the glass in her window. "Daddy?" she asked, fear beginning to tint her voice. Mark turned sharply, his military instincts surging. "Get away from the window, Ellie." Clara's hands trembled as she clutched her daughter's shoulders, pulling her back. Outside, the vehicle slowed, parking with military precision along Main Street. Their doors opened in unison. Men in dark uniforms poured out, faces hidden behind masks. The first shot fired was not at a person, but at the sky, a deafening warning that echoed across the valley. Peace broke in that instant, not with a whisper but with a roar. The townspeople froze inside their homes, hearts pounding as shadows marched through their streets. Dogs barked frantically, children cried, and the river seemed to hold its breath. Sheriff Daniels, racing toward the commotion, screeched his cruiser to a halt when he saw the line of vehicles and armed figures. His hand hovered over his radio. But before he could call for help, one of the masked men raised a weapon and aimed it directly at him. Time fractured into fragments, and the sheriff's life and the safety of the town balanced on a single breath. In the Dawson house, Clara whispered, "Mark, what's happening?" Mark's jaw tightened. He recognized their formation, their efficiency. This wasn't random violence, this was organized, deliberate. "We're under siege," he said grimly. The words fell heavy in the room, colder than any winter storm. Ellie's wide eyes brimmed with tears as she clutched her sketchbook like it might shield her. But why us? She stammered. Mark had no answer. Havenbrook had no enemies, no riches, no strategic value, or so they had always believed. Yet here they were, a quiet town with its peace shattered in 1 second, staring down the barrel of a nightmare they couldn't understand. As the invaders spread out, pounding on doors, ordering families into the street, panic bloomed like wildfire. Lights flickered on in every house, voices rose in terrified protests, and the harmony of Havenbrook cracked into chaos. The night that had begun with laughter at dinner tables was now drenched in screams. And above it all, the river that had once sung lullabies to the town now reflected the flames licking at the horizon, its silver surface scarred by fire. Havenbrook's peace was broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The masked men moved like shadows given purpose, their boots pounding against Havenbrook's familiar pavement. They spread in precise formation, blocking every street that led out of town. Floodlights snapped on from their vehicles, bathing the once quiet houses in harsh white light. Havenbrook citizens, who had always trusted in peace, now felt the first true taste of fear burn in their throats. Sheriff Daniels raised his hand slowly, his cruiser's headlights illuminating the faceless soldier in front of him. "This is private property," he began, his voice steady but lined with dread. "You have no right." A rifle but slammed against his car hood, silencing him. Another figure pointed toward the town square, signaling for the sheriff to join the others. Daniels swallowed his pride, stepped out of the car, and prayed he would live long enough to understand what this was. At the Dawson home, Mark made his decision quickly. "Basement," he ordered, his military instincts replacing hesitation with survival. Clara ushered Ellie toward the narrow stairs, clutching her daughter so tightly it hurt. But Ellie resisted, her eyes wide, her small body trembling. "Daddy, I don't want to hide," she cried. Mark knelt, gripping her shoulders. "Listen to me, Ellie. Peace is gone. What happens now is survival. And survival means doing exactly what I say." His voice cracked, but his eyes burned with resolve. Outside, the knock on doors became pounding, then kicking. Then wood splintered and locks gave way. Families were dragged into the cold night air, their pleas falling on ears that cared nothing for innocence. The quiet rhythm of Havenbrook was erased, replaced by the metallic clatter of weapons and the cries of the broken. Sheriff Daniels was forced to kneel in the town square, the heart of Havenbrook. Around him, more and more residents were herded in, their faces pale, their voices hushed in terrified murmurs. He scanned the crowd, searching for reassurance. But all he saw were eyes asking him for answers he didn't have. Back in the Dawson's basement, Ellie clutched her sketchbook, her only anchor to a world that made sense. Mark loaded an old hunting rifle he kept locked away, each metallic click echoing like a vow. Clara's hands shook as she lit a single candle, its glow fragile against the storm of violence above. "Mark," she whispered, "if they find us." He cut her off with a sharp shake of his head. "They won't. Not if I stop them first." The town square grew crowded. Mothers held children close, fathers clenched their fists helplessly. The masked men moved among them, scanning faces, whispering into radios. Sheriff Daniels recognized the precision, the cold efficiency. This wasn't chaos, this was a mission. Havenbrook wasn't unlucky. Havenbrook was chosen. A truck door slammed. From within stepped a taller figure, his coat darker, his presence commanding. Unlike the others, he removed his mask, revealing sharp eyes and a scar that cut across his cheek. He looked at the townspeople not with hatred, but with a detached curiosity, like a scientist observing specimens. He raised a gloved hand, and silence fell over the square. Mark, peering from his basement window, saw the gathering. His blood ran cold as he recognized the figure. Years ago, in a desert halfway across the world, Mark had seen that scar. He had heard that voice shouting orders in another language, had watched men fall because of him. This was no random invasion. This was personal. Havenbrook's peace had been broken not by accident, but by vengeance. Clara noticed the shift in Mark's face. "You know him," she whispered, horrified. Mark nodded slowly, his grip on the rifle tightening. "I know him, and he knows me." The candle flame flickered as if in agreement, shadows stretching long and sharp across the basement walls. Sheriff Daniels, still kneeling, finally spoke. "What do you want from us?" The scarred man smiled faintly, cruelly. "I don't want all of you," he said. "Just one." His eyes scanned the crowd with chilling precision. The townspeople shivered, their whispers rising like a wave of dread. Mark pulled back from the window, his breath catching in his throat. He knew, even before the scarred man's eyes lifted toward his home, exactly who they had come for. The scarred man stood in the center of the square like he owned the earth beneath his boots, his voice carrying with quiet authority that silenced every whimper. "This town," he declared, "is a quiet place, a forgotten place, but it shelters someone who should not be forgotten." His words sliced through the night like blades, leaving everyone trembling in their meaning. Mothers clutched their children tighter, fathers searched for answers in each other's eyes. But no one spoke. The man's presence was enough to crush any courage left in the open air. Mark Dawson crouched in the basement, the rifle resting across his knees as sweat slid down his temple. He had spent years burying the memory of the scarred man, convincing himself that ghosts could not walk into the present. But here he was, breathing, commanding, hunting. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Mark, what did you do? Why is he here?" Mark closed his eyes, the weight of his past pressing on his chest. "I thought I left it all behind. But peace was never permanent. Not for me. And now not for us." Ellie, still clutching her sketchbook, stared at her father with wide, terrified eyes. She had never seen him like this, rigid, focused, trembling with a rage that frightened her. To Ellie, her father was the man who tucked her in at night, who fixed her toys, who made silly faces to make her laugh. But tonight he was someone else. Someone forged in shadows she had never known. And for the first time, she realized that even fathers carry secrets too heavy to share. Outside, the masked soldiers dragged a man from the crowd and forced him to kneel before the scarred leader. Gasps erupted. It was Henry Clark, the town's old mechanic, a man known for kindness and little else. His voice shook as he pleaded, "I don't know anything. Please, I don't even." The crack of a rifle ended his words, leaving silence heavier than the gunshot itself. The crowd recoiled in horror. Havenbrook had never seen such violence, never believed it could touch them. But now blood painted their soil. Sheriff Daniels, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached, tried to rise, fury burning in his chest. Two soldiers shoved him back down, rifles pressing into his ribs. "Stop this madness," he roared. But his voice was drowned by the scarred man's chilling calm. "Madness? No. Order. Justice. Balance. And tonight, Havenbrook will pay its price." His eyes swept the crowd again, like a predator searching for prey, until they lingered on the Dawsons' home at the far end of the square. Mark felt the weight of those eyes even from the basement. His grip on the rifle tightened until his knuckles whitened. He had spent years hiding from the world. But the world had come knocking, demanding he answer for sins he thought buried in desert sands. He could hear Ellie sobbing softly, Clara trying to hush her, both of them looking to him for safety he wasn't sure he could give. The soldiers began moving door to door, pounding harder, dragging more families into the square. Each cry of resistance was silenced with brutal force. Windows shattered, doors splintered. Peace broke further with every second. Havenbrook was becoming unrecognizable, a nightmare painted over the canvas of a once innocent town. Clara pulled Ellie closer, whispering, "Don't make a sound. Not even a breath." The candle flame flickered weakly, casting trembling shadows across their frightened faces. Mark crouched by the basement window, his breath steadying as he watched soldiers move closer. He knew the moment was coming when hiding would no longer be enough. And in that moment, he would have to decide if peace was worth sacrificing himself to restore, or if survival meant something darker. Sheriff Daniels, still on his knees, searched the crowd and locked eyes with the townspeople he had sworn to protect. He wanted to promise them safety, wanted to tell them help was coming. But the truth burned in his chest. No help would arrive in time. Havenbrook was alone, and its sheriff's badge felt like a cruel piece of tin against the power that surrounded them. The scarred man raised a gloved hand and pointed toward the Dawson Street. Soldiers moved in formation, their boots striking the pavement like a war drum. The crowd's whispers grew frantic. People could feel the target shift, even if they didn't know why. Daniel's heart dropped as realization dawned on him. Whoever this stranger was hunting, it wasn't random. Havenbrook's suffering had a name, and it lived at the edge of town. Mark turned from the window, his eyes locked on Clara's. In them, she saw not just fear but a farewell. "If they find us," he whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of truth, "don't let them take Ellie." Clara shook her head violently, tears streaking down her face. "No, Mark. Don't you dare." He placed a trembling hand against her cheek. "I made enemies, Clara. I made promises I couldn't keep. And now the cost is here. But you and Ellie, you're worth any price." Ellie's sobs grew louder as she clutched his arm, her voice high-pitched with terror. "Daddy, don't go. Please, don't leave us." Mark kissed the top of her head, holding her as tightly as he could for what he feared might be the last time. His heart split between love and duty, peace and violence, past and present. Above them, the sound of boots grew louder, closer, pounding across the Dawson porch. The knock came hard enough to rattle the frame. A soldier's voice bellowed, "Open up, or we come in." Clara covered Ellie's mouth, muffling her cries. Or Mark lifted the rifle with hands that shook not from fear, or from the weight of destiny. Havenbrook's peace had already been broken. Now war was at their door. The front door of the Dawson house exploded inward with a crash that shook the walls. Splinters rained across the floor as masked soldiers surged inside, their rifles sweeping the room in practiced arcs. Clara tightened her grip on Ellie, pressing her against her chest, whispering prayers into her hair. Mark stood at the foot of the basement stairs, rifle aimed upward, heart pounding like a war drum. The moment he had dreaded was no longer in the distance. It was here, breathing down his neck. Boots thundered above them, the voices of soldiers barking orders in clipped tones. One of them kicked open the basement door, flashlight beams stabbing into the darkness. For a heartbeat, everything held still. The candle flame, Ellie's sobs, Clara's trembling hands, until Mark fired. The rifle roared in the enclosed space, the sound like thunder breaking the bones of silence. A soldier fell backward with a scream, crashing into his comrades. Peace was no more. Blood had claimed its place. The soldiers retaliated, bullets shredding the air, with splintering into a storm of dust and noise. Mark dragged Clara and Ellie deeper into the basement, shielding them with his body as he reloaded with trembling hands. Clara cried out, "Mark, stop. You'll get us all killed." But he shook his head, jaw clenched. "If I don't fight, we're already dead." His voice was a steel blade, cutting through fear with determination. Sheriff Daniels, still kneeling in the square, heard the gunfire. His heart clenched. He knew then exactly who the scarred man was after. The sheriff tried to rise again, tried to make himself heard. "Leave them alone. It's me you want, not them." But the scarred man only smiled coldly. "No, Sheriff. You've never mattered. This is between him and me." And with a wave of his hand, more soldiers moved toward the Dawson house. Inside, chaos swallowed reason. Ellie screamed as bullets tore through the basement walls. Mark returned fire, his aim steady despite the storm, each shot fueled by the desperate need to keep his family breathing. Clara clutched Ellie's face, whispering, "Don't look, baby, don't look." But Ellie's eyes, wide and filled with terror, refused to close. She wanted to remember her father as he was now, fierce, unyielding, fighting for them against an enemy the town never asked for. The scarred man approached slowly, his boots crunching against gravel, his eyes fixed on the Dawson home. He had waited years for this confrontation, and now it played out before him like a stage. "Mark Dawson," he bellowed, his voice booming across the town. "You can't hide anymore. Come face me, or I'll burn this whole place to ash." His words struck like a hammer, each syllable echoing in the hearts of Havenbrook's people, forcing them to witness a private war that had stolen their peace. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He turned to Clara, his face pale but resolute. "I have to go," he whispered. Clara's tears streamed freely now. "If you go out there, they'll kill you." Mark cupped her face, pressing his forehead to hers. "If I don't, they'll kill everyone." It was the cruel arithmetic of war. And Mark knew the equation offered no mercy. He kissed Ellie's forehead, his lips trembling. "Be strong, sweetheart. Draw the world the way you want it to be, not the way it is." Ellie clung to him, sobbing. "Daddy, please don't go." He pulled away, his heart shattering, and forced himself up the stairs. With each step, the sound of the soldiers, the scarred man's voice, and the screams of Havenbrook grew louder. When he stepped outside, the night seemed to inhale. The townspeople, gathered in the square, turned their eyes to him. Mark Dawson, once just a father and husband, now stood as the reason their peace had been destroyed. The scarred man smiled at the sight, spreading his arms as though welcoming an old friend. "There you are," he said. "I told you we'd finish this." The two men faced each other under the floodlights, history carved into their eyes. Mark raised his rifle, but the scarred man only shook his head. "No, not like this," he said, tossing his own weapon aside. "This is personal." The crowd held its breath, the world shrinking to two men and the space between them. They lunged, colliding in a blur of fists, rage, and memory. Years of war replayed in their blows. Victories, betrayals, debts unpaid. The townspeople watched in silence, the masked soldiers surrounding them like statues. For minutes that felt like eternity, Mark and the scarred man battled, each strike carrying the weight of lives lost and peace shattered. Finally, Mark, bloodied and exhausted, found his moment. With a final surge of strength, he knocked the scarred man to the ground, pressing his rifle barrel against the man's chest. "This ends now," Mark growled, his voice broken but fierce. The scarred man laughed bitterly, blood on his teeth. "Peace was always a lie, Dawson. You'll never save them." But Mark pulled the trigger, ending a chapter that had haunted him for years. The soldiers froze. For the first time, their movements faltered, their unity cracked. Without their leader, they hesitated, unsure. Sheriff Daniels seized the moment, shouting, "Now! Take them down!" The townspeople, fueled by desperation, surged forward. Rocks, fists, tools, whatever they had, clashed against rifles. Chaos erupted. But this time it was the chaos of resistance, not surrender. Clara, clutching Ellie in the basement, heard the shouts and cries. She rushed upstairs, dragging her daughter, and saw the townspeople rising, the soldiers breaking. And in the center of it all, Mark, battered and bleeding, stood like a broken pillar holding up the last wall of Havenbrook's peace. By dawn, the invaders were gone, retreating into the forest like shadows dissolving with the light. The scarred man lay still in the square, his vengeance ended, his presence fading into history. The town was battered, scarred, forever changed. But Havenbrook was alive. Mark collapsed to his knees, Clara and Ellie rushing to him. He pulled them close, whispering with the last of his strength, "Peace isn't something you're given. It's something you fight for." His voice faded, but his words burned into Havenbrook's heart. The town would remember that night forever, the night peace was broken, and the night they learned how to rebuild it.